Welcome everyone. We'll just give it a couple of minutes to allow people to join the webinar, and then we will kick off. Okay, that is most attendees have joined us. So we'll just make a start because we have only 1 hour to explore such a lot of information. Okay, good afternoon and welcome. My name is Kristina Nitsolova and I'm the Urban Development Officer at Community Land Scotland. This is the first part of a joint event between Community Land Scotland and Carnegie UK Trust. Both organizations believe that community ownership can play a key role in transforming our towns, and Midsteeple Quarter leads this change, a group of local people passionate about changing the face of Dumfries town centre, buying and redeveloping empty buildings. We are delighted that they're taking part in this event to share their journey into community ownership and community-led regeneration. We have been overwhelmed by the level of interest in this event, and we will be working to create more opportunities for sharing innovative thinking and for supporting groups who are interested in community ownership in towns across Scotland. So a few practicalities before I hand over to the Midsteeple Quarter team. There will be a presentation for half an hour followed by a discussion. You can post questions at any time using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we will pick those up after the presentation. Feel free to share the conversation via social media, and we will post our social media tags in the chat section, and the session will be recorded and then later be made available on the Community Land Scotland Vimeo channel. A follow-up email will be sent, so you won't miss out on any of the information. And now, without further ado, I would like to hand over to Scott Mackay, who is the manager of the Midsteeple Quarter. Scott.
Hello, everybody. As Christina says, I'm Scott Mackay. I'm the manager of Midsteeple Quarter. I will just start the presentation. It's interesting that it's at Burns Day today. It seems that more than a coincidence, perhaps, that we're focusing on Dumfries, which is where Burns spent most of his life and ended his days. And Midsteeple Quarter is a very important part of what's happening in Dumfries at the moment. But it's more than just a project. It's a community benefit society which is breathing new life into Dumfries town centre by seeking to redevelop empty high street properties and create a new neighbourhood with a mix of uses built upon principles of local prosperity and well-being. Dumfries is the largest town in southwest Scotland, and for centuries it has been the principal market town for the region of what is now known as Dumfries and Galloway, which stretches from Langham in the east to Stranraer in the west. However, despite its previous wealth and economic prosperity, in recent years it's become a market town with no market, much like a coal town with no mine. And Dumfries High Street, this is Dumfries High Street 2012, many buildings are underused and in poor condition. The community is demoralised about the state of their town centre. And the reasons are that during the 1980s and 1990s, Dumfries was judged to have a big enough catchment to justify establishing national chain stores, and property investors bought up the high street and rented to national chains, which priced out independent local shops and businesses like hotels and bars. And our high street became a monoculture of retail. Planning policy exacerbated this with the priority for Class 1 retail in the high street, which made it almost impossible for units to get change of use. And national chains were only interested in enlarging their footprint. Ground floors were extended and businesses were not interested in the diversity of people living upstairs. Flats were emptied and these upper floor spaces were either converted to storage or merely abandoned. There's currently only one long-term flat on our high street, and all the upper floors in this image are empty. We have totally depopulated the high street, and the combination of these factors means that come 5 p.m, it becomes a ghost town. In 2011, the Stove Network was formed, and it was the only community development trust in the UK led by artists. The Stove's a 3-storey former shop unit right in the heart of the high street. It's not an arts centre in the traditional sense of people visiting to see the work of artists. Rather, it is the HQ for a collective conversation about the future of the town, which is facilitated by the artists of the Stove. There's a community cafe on the ground floor and community and production spaces on the upper floors. And since they began, the Stove have asked the same question in a variety of ways. What is the future Dumfries that you would like to see, and how are we as a community going to make that happen? The artists keep asking questions, keep coming up with innovative solutions, and keep communicating with the public, meaning that the regeneration initiatives they are involved in never retreat behind closed doors. They remain public and accessible, which is essential for a community-led approach. An example of this is an early Stove project. They handed out speech bubble cards to the public who were asked to fill them in and say what a building, their home, office, etc. would say. These were then posted on social media, starting a conversation about the town in a light-hearted and creative way. A larger scale project called Square Go in 2016, the river and the main street were sketched out on the town square with models of 3 landmark buildings. Volunteers were stationed around the square to engage passers-by in conversation about the town. They had cue cards and offered conversations on shopping, business, living in town, transport, the river, etc. At the end of each conversation, people were invited to draw in chalk something from their conversation, and over 3 days, a new town built up on the square. Charter 14 was a new town charter. The original debate dates back from 1475. And this was crowdsourced from all the community groups that the Stove worked with in Dumfries, and it was launched as part of the annual town festival, Good Neighbours. People were invited to sign and seal the charter, and there was a space to add their own particular priority, then take their charter away and stick it on their fridge. Everyone who signed the charter was photographed with it, and these were shared on social media and in a film which was made of the project. The Stove have held many community meetings to talk about the town, and this one was on the subject of transport. People attended who were representing different parts of the transport debate, and a people's transport policy from Dumfries resulted from the session. After each of the public events held, the key findings from the consultations were displayed on the walls of the community cafe in the Stove. It has been important to always have a way for more people to contribute and keep the conversation expanding. As you can imagine, pretty much everyone in the town has their own magic bullet for solving the town centre, whether it's a Primark store or a bowling alley. However, over the process of public engagement and collective working, themes of consensus started to emerge, and people wanted a mix and diverse high street, not 100% retail, but rather a mix of services, leisure, enterprise, learning. People wanted a localised economy that would retain prosperity and opportunities within the community. But one big feature that people wanted was for people to live in the town centre again, growing a sense of community, of ownership, responsibility, a nighttime economy, and a demand for more diverse shops like bakeries and greengrocers. A national architecture competition for what was beginning to be called Midsteeple Quarter was exhibited in Dumfries and in Glasgow, which started to frame the potential impacts of the project in terms of where economic, health and well-being, environmental, to develop a group of key stakeholders nationally and locally who would support the idea of the project. The vision of the project was distilled into an approach to develop a core area at the centre of the town, an area where empty buildings were concentrated, but was also strategically positioned for the town being connected to the riverside, traditionally the main entrance point to the high street. The idea was that by developing a core area, the influence of the project would spread further into the town centre. The Scottish Government's community empowerment legislation was at the heart of the idea. Using initiatives like community asset transfers and community right to buy, we hope to bring 8 high street properties into community ownership and develop them as a community for the benefit of the community. Previously, this legislation had been used by communities predominantly in the Highlands to buy back land used for shooting estates or islands that were then stewarded by the community. Dumfries was the first to cry that they wanted to buy back our high street. Public engagement has continued with projects such as the Duntoon Army, groups of volunteers who have taken part in street cleans and practical projects to support, like painting closes and shop fronts. These calls to action brought more people and stakeholders into the conversation. Around this time, we got our first significant support from the council. Enlightened officials in the housing department put forward an idea called the Town Centre Living Fund, which used the receipts from council tax on second homes to create a £1 million fund to support projects that encourage people to live in town centres. The Stove Network bid into the fund and received £100,000 to put together the necessary justification for a community asset transfer for the first target building, and to set up, constitute and launch a community organisation to run the project, plus continue the community engagement projects and project manage all this. Following in-depth research, a community benefit society was decided upon as the preferred organisational structure. This was because it allowed us to offer community shares as a means of generating funding for the project, and the principle of collective ownership afforded by a benefit society seemed the right ethical fit for the project. The Midsteeple Quarter Community Benefit Society was launched in April 2018 with a public event in the town centre. Our local politician spoke from a soapbox about the importance of the town centre. We had fire eaters and musicians. And on the first day, more than 150 people signed up as members. Our current membership is now approaching 500. Midsteeple Quarter is run by a board that is annually elected by the membership. The board employ a small project team to run the project day to day. And members pay an initial £1 as a share in the project and receive a share certificate showing their part ownership of the project. And sharing these on social media has been successful in widening the membership and awareness of the project. We have honed our vision for the High Street and produced our vision document called A Blueprint for the Heart of Dumfries. This glossy document expresses our mission in a way which enables us to better communicate it to the world, especially with stakeholders, partners and grant funders. To summarise it, the Midsteeple Quarter vision is to see the local community take control of a group of underused and neglected high street buildings and refurbish and redevelop these as a contemporary living, working, socialising, learning and enterprising quarter, a new beating heart for a more diverse town centre and a catalyst for a thriving and resilient future Dumfries. The current economies of the town centre present a unique opportunity to gather prominent high street properties into community ownership and position the community to drive a localised economic model, locking inclusive prosperity into Dumfries as a regional centre and reduce the outflow of financial capital. This will enhance the town's performance at local, regional and national level. The focus fell upon a stretch of Dumfries High Street, located in the centre of Dumfries, adjacent to the historic Midsteeple building. This was the focus of the majority of the vacant shop units and empty upper floors. Here, almost all the properties in the High Street have been empty or disused for some time. Many were significantly decayed as a result of neglect by absentee owners. It is also at the centre of the High Street, with Bank Street on one side being one of the main routes to the High Street from the river and car parking. We consider it to be the heart of the town centre, and this urban block has become defined as the Midsteeple Quarter. We sought to reimagine this block of empty buildings as a community-run mixed development of live, work, education, enterprise and social spaces. Our idea is that the Midsteeple Quarter will bring new life to a concentrated area in the very centre of the town to stimulate new growth around it, encouraging investment and confidence in the local economy. In 2018, we held an architecture competition to provide ideas for this concept, which was won by ARPL Architects, whom we now have an ongoing relationship with, and they have helped produce our master plan and design. This master plan was submitted to the council and was approved in November 2019 as supplementary planning policy, underpinned by a planning policy in the local development plan 2 for Dumfries and Galloway. The master plan was founded on 3 key principles: the local community taking the lead on development, repopulating the town centre by creating high quality but affordable housing on upper floors, a dynamic, engaging street level activity supporting a mixed and vibrant local economy. Economic strategy and development are central to the vision by providing much needed quality micro enterprise space at the heart of the town, partnering with South of Scotland Enterprise, Dumfries and Galloway Council and the Stove Network to create jobs and a vibrant economy in the centre of town. We're creating a new neighbourhood, a community of about 200 people. The completed regeneration may provide up to 60 homes on upper floors and around 50 units for other uses, mainly on ground floors. The Midsteeple neighbourhood will be characterised by attractive, high quality, affordable residential accommodation for rent, affordable retail and commercial spaces for independent businesses, flexible and accessible working, learning and community spaces. An improved physical environment should be established throughout the backland areas with enhanced daylighting, privacy, outlook, solar gain, open spaces, public realm and accessibility. And the master plan envisages reopening the closes and bringing life back to them with activity at ground floor level and living accommodation on upper levels with windows and balconies. Viably sized retail and public facing spaces adjacent to the high street. An intermediate co-working and maker spaces affordable for new ventures and third sector activity, nurturing financially viable enterprise as the prosperity of the town centre improves. Innovative uses at the ends of backland plots to stimulate secondary activity in the zone behind the high street. A broad indication of the construction costs has also been prepared using recent cost estimates for emerging development proposals as a benchmark, and a total project cost in the region of 25 million is envisaged. Although this is a lot of money, to put it into context, we've already raised about £3 million for phase 1, and it's envisaged as a long-term project over the next 15 to 20 years. The master plan includes a phasing plan showing phase 1, which is the oven, which I'll come on to explain. Phase 2 is site assembly through purchase and meanwhile use of other high street frontages and backland. And phase 3 is the development of those high street frontage and backland. Phases 4 and 5 are not necessarily considering acquisition, but working with current and future owners. In parallel, we've been working on a green energy initiative for the entire quarter. And this vision is for a scheme which could include suitable renewable technologies in new buildings and converted buildings. And we're currently assessing how a district heating system could be created for the quarter and potentially use geothermal technology related to the unique geology of Dumfries and the warm water aquifer which runs below the town centre. And we've recently secured funding from CARES, the Scottish Government Community and Renewable Energy Scheme, for the development of this proposal, including the drilling of a test borehole. So phase 1, the oven, this is it outlined there in red. The plans for phase 1 of the project are now at an advanced stage of design and planning. And phase 1 comprises the redevelopment of 135 to 139 High Street, which faces onto Queensbury Square and is formerly occupied by a baker's shop. And we call this building the oven. The building was owned by Dumfries and Galloway Council, and Midsteeple Quarter took ownership of this building through a community asset transfer, which was agreed in November 2018. The upper floors are essentially derelict, but the ground floor of the building has been used by Midsteeple Quarter since then as a pop-up shop and exhibition and event space. The idea being that we could test the capacity of the market for community groups to make use of the space, which would assist in formulating our ideas for its future. Midsteeple Quarter, in partnership with the Stove, installed a video art project. Whose Hoose is this? And people could submit 30-second videos that were added to a menu of films that were projected in the windows of the oven and could be selected for instant viewing by passers-by via a web link shown in the shop window. The building provided this opportunity to continue engaging with the community through informal artistic projects. It also provided a great space and shop window to continue engaging with the community about the work of Midsteeple Quarter and ask questions about specific aspects of the project. And these community consultation events and exercises are a key aspect of justifying further acquisition of buildings into community ownership. Having successfully prototyped and tested the community use of the ground floor space, the community began to realise that this building and the land to the rear had great potential, so plans were drawn up for its redevelopment. The redevelopment proposals include the building, its entire plot and former studio building to the rear. On the high street, the existing high street building facade is to be retained, with original dormers and chimneys reinstated, and the plans will seek to activate the close with links to the high street with Irish Street. We have plans to hold a competition in partnership with local high schools to design a new shopfront. The proposals provide a range of flexible business, cultural and community spaces on the ground and first floors, with 7 affordable flats to rent, with balconies, 2 within the existing building and 5 in a newly built element to the rear of the plot and upper floors. And these will be linked by a communal outdoor space at second floor level. Feasibility work has taken development proposals through architectural design, community engagement and business planning in discussion with the council and other public agencies. And a detailed planning permission for this project was granted in August 2020. We intend to start demolition work this spring, with the main development contract planned for summer 2021, with completion mid-2023. We aim to achieve change and build a track record as soon as possible. Therefore, this phase 1 is important in order to prove our concept for the rest of the Midsteeple vision to take shape. The delivery of the oven is key to this, as it will bring much needed momentum and build confidence amongst the community, funders, investors and occupiers for the remaining phases. In the meantime, phase 2 is already well underway with the acquisition of additional buildings. Earlier this year, we identified and approached all the owners of buildings along the high street of Midsteeple Quarter. A mixed picture of potential acquisitions emerged, and to date we've been in negotiation with the owner of 5 more buildings where the owners have indicated they might sell. Many of these buildings changed hands 10 or 20 years ago for amounts of money far in excess of their current market valuations. So some owners' expectations on price have proved an obstacle to us being able to acquire them. During this period, we've also been in discussion with funders, including the Scottish Land Fund and South of Scotland Economic Partnership, which is now the Economic Agency, to fund future acquisitions. And we finalised the purchase of 2 buildings in September 2020. These are 113 to 115 and 117 High Street. In previous lives, these were occupied by Boots, Chelsea Girl, River Island and the former Dinwiddie's Stationers and Printworks. Sadly, both these buildings have been vacant for over 10 years and are suffering badly from lack of maintenance. 113 to 115 is in desperate state of disrepair, and the upper floors are currently unusable due to the level of dereliction, decay and extensive dry rot. 117 is in better condition but lacks any access to the upper floors because of the removal of the internal staircase to maximise the ground floor retail floor space. However, the ground floor is extensive, and in addition to the shop area, there are offices with kitchen and toilet facilities and 2 large workshop buildings to the rear. And after removing a suspended ceiling recently, we also discovered it has a fabulous original vaulted ceiling. Both these buildings are currently undergoing temporary repairs inside and out to make them suitable for meanwhile uses while we prepare the redevelopment plans. Funding for these repairs has been granted by the Architectural Heritage Fund and the Annandale and Nithsdale Community Benefit Company. The Stove Network, the Dumfries Women's Signwriting Squad and many volunteers have helped so far, and there's more work to be done over the coming months. In order to help identify these buildings, we carried out an online poll with our membership, following which we renamed the buildings the Smithy and the Press. Both these names are evocative of the past lives of these buildings. Midsteeple Quarter are working with local people with business plans to use these buildings on a short-term rent basis and to work with us to come up with new community enterprise ideas. And given the closure of the oven due to its imminent redevelopment, we are using the Smithy for our ongoing community engagement, in addition to using the internal space for public consultation and community pop-up events when COVID restrictions allow. The building also provides a shop window for MSQ onto the high street. And following an open invitation to artists, we've just commissioned an art installation which will reflect and communicate the local community and business support for MSQ, and will occupy one window display area. And for the other window, we've just commissioned a 3-dimensional scale model of the Midsteeple Quarter, which will have before and after models of each phase and will be used at our public consultation events. Engagement and communications are very important to the success of MSQ, and we have extensive social media and communications programs. Last autumn, we launched our new website, which, as well as having a fresh look, is also more user-friendly and provides lots of resources and content about Midsteeple Quarter and how we're taking our vision forward. The website also includes downloadable content, including case studies about Midsteeple Quarter. In 2020, Midsteeple Quarter continued to gain national UK-wide recognition for its innovative approach to town centre regeneration. It is regarded as the first community-owned development of a high street in the UK. The Carnegie UK Trust used Midsteeple Quarter as one of 11 case studies following the Turnaround Towns UK report, which draws together stories of towns around the UK who are transforming their futures. The report praised the Stove and Midsteeple Quarter for how they have been able to use different funding pots to build community wealth, to influence local and national policy, to secure support and create opportunities, to act within the permission of the community, to steward an ongoing local conversation, to be open to experimenting and committed to action. The London School of Economics' recent Saving the High Street report used Midsteeple Quarter as one of only 6 UK case studies, and the only one in Scotland, to praise the project for its community engagement and conversation, and argued it was a fundamental foundation to achieving the long-term regeneration of the High Street. Commissioned by the Power to Change Trust, the study of community ownership states that Midsteeple Quarter is a unique and ambitious community-led initiative, one which presents an opportunity to rethink the High Street in order to achieve the widest possible potential community and town centre benefits. It shows that by giving the community control over the commercial and creative opportunities in the High Street, the challenges presented by the dramatic change in High Street retailing can be addressed. The taking forward of the Midsteeple Quarter vision would not be possible without ongoing support and collaboration with our stakeholders and partners who provide expertise, capacity, and of course, funding. Midsteeple Quarter has matured, having moved from a campaign group with a mission to become a community property development organisation. And although we now have a dedicated and growing project team, Midsteeple Quarter is and always will be driven by the power of its members and volunteers. What we are doing is pioneering. If this was easy, we would not be the UK's first community-owned development of a high street. We're working hard to turn around our high street, where the economic climate has failed us, where buildings are now worth a fraction of what they cost only a few years ago, and owners of these buildings are trapped by negative values and lack of retail tenants. They seem to have no solution other than to let buildings sit empty, refusing to accept their losses and admit defeat, while their investments continue to reduce in value, detracting and defacing the heart of the community. It requires a huge effort to turn the high street around, and it's slow and often frustrating, but it is also exciting and rewarding. We have made fantastic progress, and we remain determined to keep that spirit of protest and passion for positive change, which has got us this far. We have created the hashtag Reclaim the High Street to reflect the community taking back control, and we can continue to follow our journey on, and you can continue to follow our journey on our social media channels. The COVID pandemic has accelerated and intensified the pressures on high streets up and down the country, with stores now closing on a regular basis. And this situation amplifies the need for a fresh approach, and Dumfries is for once ahead of that curve by having the Midsteeple Quarter vision in place and underway. The pandemic is also encouraging previously reluctant owners to cut their losses and sell their properties. Part of the recovery from COVID must be the reuse of vacant retail spaces for new local businesses and social enterprises to start up. Community ownership can enable that by working with potential tenants to make spaces accessible and affordable. We're currently reaching out for support to purchase the 3 remaining empty high street buildings within the Midsteeple Quarters, number 109, 111 and 121. Following independent valuations, feasibility and business planning, we have successfully negotiated with the owners to agree to sell to us exclusively off market. The Scottish Land Fund has awarded us a grant towards the purchase of 2 of these buildings. However, to demonstrate community support and enable us to purchase all 3 and make them usable again by making immediate repairs and covering initial costs, we need to raise additional funds. And our crowdfunder went live 1 week ago and runs until midnight on the 14th of February. If you want to support us, please visit our website, or you can scan this QR code with your phone to take you directly to the crowdfunder platform. I hope you found this presentation interesting and instructive. Thanks for listening. We're now going to have a Q&A session, and I will introduce you to our panel, who are team members of Midsteeple Quarter. Hello, are you there, panel?
We're here.
Hello. So we have Matt Baker, who is Strategic Director for Midsteeple Quarter and also Orchestrator at the Stove. And Evie Copeland, who is our Chair of the Board of Midsteeple Quarter. And Alison MacLeod, who is a Board Member and Company Secretary. I'm just looking to see the questions. I think, Christina, you're going to have to help us. I'm not seeing any questions coming up.
Yes. Hi. Yes, well, I think we just allow a few minutes for folk to, oh, I'm not on screen. Okay, there we go. There's one. Can you see it in the chat box? Oh no, that's not a question. Anyway, I have come up with a question as well, so maybe we can kick off with that one. Oh, where is it?
Yeah, I'm seeing some questions coming up in the Q&A now. There's a few coming up. Yeah.
I will hold mine.
Well, if you want to, you can start us off if you'd like to, Christina.
No. I would prioritize the audience members. Okay, if you can say all right, then I'll hand over back to you.
Thanks a lot.
Sure.
Okay, first question. Well, to what extent will community-sourced ideas of the uses of spaces be continued beyond the meanwhile development phase? Or will the uses of the units be more fixed once development has been undertaken? That's a good one. Well, Matt, would you like to have an answer? Go for an answer to that one.
Oh, hi Lizzie, how you doing? Yeah, the way Midsteeple Quarter has worked, not very much has been fixed throughout the whole process, because there has been an element that nothing like this has really been done before. So there has been an element of making it up as we go along, which sounds well, we can't say that to big funders all the time, but that there is a improvisational element to what we're doing because it's new. But obviously with the restraints of architecture and all those big solid things that come into the equation when you're doing property development, things are going to be restricted to how flexible they can be. But we, as far as possible, what we're looking to do is future-proof our high street by looking at long-term vision, and so we do hope that things can be flexible. I mean, where we are at the moment is that we're thinking about it in three sort of zones back from the high street. That the zone right on the high street is very much the public facing part, and will need to be occupied all the time. But the sort of secondary part behind that is always going to be a slightly riskier zone, and allows us the flexibility at the moment to do things that are going to continue to change. And when way we've done with the oven, the architecture is based around that. So we're imagining that at the moment there isn't a long-term desire for making units right in the town centre at the moment. But so what we're working on is a large space which is flexible, which allows the market to be established, but the architecture is set in such a way that those units can then be subdivided and individually accessed from the street when that market arrives. So we're anticipating markets as we go along.
Thanks, Matt. Next question, Leslie Riddoch. Hello, Leslie. That's about the target that we're looking to reach with the crowdfunder, and does it all have to be individual public donations? Alison, would you like to answer that?
Yes, it doesn't have to be all individual public donations. We're interested in raising it anyway, really. But one thing is for sure, we don't have time to put in applications to other funders to come up with the match funding, because that Scottish Land Fund money is only available until the end of the financial year, and that doesn't give a big enough time scale to apply to other places. So yes, any way of getting money in that's legal and you know, I suppose there are some places we might not accept money from, but it doesn't all have to be individual at all. No, any way of raising it that's legal and respectable is fine.
Have you got any ideas, Leslie?
Have I got any idea? Oh, Leslie. Yeah, any ideas would be very welcome.
Yeah, absolutely. Go on to the next question. Thanks for that one. About the ongoing revenue costs, Deborah, thanks for your question. Ongoing revenue costs for the buildings in the future. Anybody keen to answer that one? Oh, if you want, I'll have a go at that one.
Thanks, Scott.
No, yeah, I gave you the chance. So it's quite complicated, that obviously, because we're at the stage we're at the moment. But the easiest way to explain it to you is maybe about some of the current discussions we're having with potential tenants. So being a community organisation and having purchased these buildings with public funds, we're in a quite unique position compared to a private landlord looking at it purely commercially. So the primary purpose for us is to get new uses into these spaces, to activate them again and create footfall and reasons for people to be in the high street, which will obviously have knock-on benefits to the other retailers and services in the high street. So it's not just about income, but obviously we will want that to start to be self-sustaining. So initially we are looking at rent-free periods and assistance with fit out to make it as affordable and as accessible as possible for local people to have the opportunity to start an enterprise on the high street. And the idea is that will go forward in future phases. So as we start to bring in income, the phases will start to move forward.
I think it's important to talk about the housing there as well, Scott, in terms of that.
Yeah.
A major part of income for us. It is a mixed model of housing and commercial, and that, you know, a lot of people are asking us why we're not working with a housing association to do that, and one of the reasons for that is that we need the revenue from the housing to make the whole model stack up.
And the other thing is that the potential, maybe if the green energy development that we're looking for, we don't yet know how that's going to go. That's still at feasibility stage, but its potential, that potentially we might have energy that we can sell, green energy that we can sell to other businesses in the area, which again also will be an income generator.
Great, great answers. There's a question from Susie. This one's definitely for you, Evie. How are we continuing community engagement through COVID times?
Oh, well, I guess just a lot of it's the same as everybody else. We're making the most of the digital platforms that we've got at our disposal, but I guess the thing that's made this a little bit different is there's things to see. So when people are getting their government approved our exercise a day, things have been happening on the high street, things to come and see and be part of. And I guess the crowdfunder kind of dovetails nicely into that as well, that, you know, people can now put their own mark, take a little bit of the organisation and be part of it really happening and put some money into it now. But things have been happening, and I think that's where we've been kind of blessed that COVID hasn't really held us back. And as long as, you know, people are part of this and our membership have such a strong voice in terms of the opportunities that we can give them, COVID or not, the people are the power at the heart of everything we're doing.
Great. Yeah. And I think also the use of the smithy windows as well is going to be a great thing to have something physical, isn't it? The art commission and the 3D model, and that as people are walking past, they'll be able to see it, even if we're not able to go in the building. That's great. Nick,
the sign writing skills as well. The sign writing team from the Stowe, we'd only just taken those new buildings on, and the sign writing had gone up to give them a new look and with the names that we'd chosen for them, and everything was cleaned and tidied, and there's been activity going on in these windows, which has changed over time and will continue to change and engage people and bring them in to understand what it's about.
Thanks, Alison. Next question's from Annette, who's a councillor in Clarkson and Busby. Hello, that's my where I'm from. I went to Williamwood High School, so it's nice to hear from you. I know Clarkson very well. You've asked us about how we use the community asset transfer powers to move development forward. Well, interesting, community asset transfer was used for the purchase of the oven. We had hoped to use the community right to buy as well, and maybe I could bring Alison in here, because Alison's obviously got experience of this in another context as well as Midsteeple, but community right to buy hasn't yet been working for us at Midsteeple Quarter, despite our best intentions. Alison, do you want to touch on that?
Yeah, so I was familiar with community right to buy legislation in relating to remote rural communities, small communities, which it was set up with those in mind, where there's a relatively small population, and there's the chance for everybody to vote as to whether an asset transfer should go ahead or not. But for that to work, you really need it needs to be quite a small community, because a development trust has got, you know, limited time in its hands and always limited staff, and the communication that you would need to do for a bigger area like Dumfries. I mean, we have 40,000 in the area. The post is delineated by postcodes, so there's 40,000 residents in the area that Midsteeple Quarter covers. It would be impossible for us to get the information out to all these people so that they understood that we wanted them to vote and why we wanted them to vote. We wouldn't get the turnout that's needed to get that response, and we wouldn't potentially get the agreement from the community to go ahead. So it's difficult legislation for urban communities to use. So we have been looking at, instead of doing it through Midsteeple Quarter itself, forming a smaller organisation that covers a more limited area in the town centre, directly around the area that we're looking to take on as ownership, and balloting that smaller area, which luckily so far we've managed to acquire the buildings without having to take it to ballot, without having to use any of the legislation. But it may well be at some point that we will need to go and use that legislation. So we have, the team has sought advice from the community land team, the Scottish Government, and that's what they've advised, to look at using a small area to do that. So we've identified the appropriate area, which is done by using postcodes, and we'll be exploring that further, and we will go ahead with a ballot in that area.
Right, we'll move on quickly. There's loads of questions. I'm not going to have much time for them all, unfortunately, but I'll do my best. And it's just also asked about the Architectural Heritage Fund that I mentioned. That I believe is lottery money specifically related to heritage, architectural heritage. So if you have a look on the Architectural Heritage Fund website, there's a number of different grants for different purposes that that you can apply for. So that would be the best place to look for that. Russell was asking about how we've handled communication strategies and whether we mapped it out at the beginning or just let it evolve. Who wants to answer that one?
Matt, do you want to go first? I'll chime in at the end.
I think you and I should just carry on an ongoing discussion about this, Evie. For those of you that don't know, Evie's actually has a communications background, and there's been long discussion about the need for strategies or not strategies. Well, my answer would be that's mostly been a responsive. The idea was to have a conversation with the local population, so it's been a kind of almost like a call and response kind of campaign. Obviously, that's changed quite a lot now as the project has become a lot more established, and therefore we are now working to a plan, or a development plan, and therefore there's a communication plan that works alongside that. But certainly in the first instance, it was this kind of call and response approach. So Evie, what's your?
I think the important things with projects like ours is that, the plan doesn't mean everything. I think we were really led by our values in a lot of things, so it didn't really matter about having, the next 30, 60 or 90 days, however you want to do it, carved out in stone. It was more about doing what felt right. And I think, community organisations are never going to have, a comms person cracking the whip or making sure that strategies are fulfilled, but I think you need to do what's right and make sure, especially, that it's an open dialogue and that there's as much opportunity for participation as there is for, sharing the good stuff that's going on. And I think that's where, we have really thrived, because we have allowed that. And it's as much about what people are talking to us about as our broadcast, if you like. But a lot of it is just led by doing the right thing for Dumfries. And I think that's worked incredibly well to date.
Great, good answers. Next question, Leslie again. Why have we got such a short period to raise the cash? Well, I think it was, as Alison touched on, maybe you could answer it again, but it's the Scottish Land Fund is this financial year. So that money, we have to conclude missives on the purchase of the properties by the 31st of March. So that puts us into a short timescale to do that. Otherwise, we'd have to apply again next year with no guarantee. So you're asking also about how much we need to raise. Well, the target is £450,000, but we appreciate that that's an extremely high goal. That would enable us to buy all 3 buildings now, do immediate repairs, cover all our initial costs. But even if we raised 100,000, it would enable us to buy 1 building. So we've got to aim high in the hope that we'll get as much as possible, but we're realistic about that. Any more want to answer that? Any more on that?
I think there's also the point there that to some degree the crowdfunder is also part of a not exactly a PR campaign, but certainly a lobbying campaign with other potential funders, and showing community support for the project is important to potentially lever additional funding in from South Scotland Enterprise, from Scottish Government, whoever who might help us out at the end of their year end to meet that shortfall, and between the community's contribution, the Land Fund and another funder might just make the difference.
Yeah. Sylvia's asking about cars. That's I assume you mean the Conservation Area Regeneration Scheme funding. I can answer that one. I'm kind of dealing with that with the local authority. The Dumfries and Galloway Council have just been awarded the cars funding for the conservation area in Dumfries. So some of our buildings are within that application that was made. So there is going to be some money towards the refurbishment of the buildings, which it will have to be match funded from other sources, but it will help. The next question is keen to know how we've managed to negotiate with the landowners who would be out of pocket if they sold at market value. Any top tips? Anybody keen to answer that one? Matt?
I'll fire in. The question of out of pocket is kind of an interesting one, given current situation. What actually is out of pocket? Where everyone's in an unprecedented financial situation. The top tip is communication. From our point of view, for ages we swithered about how best to approach landowners You know, should we talk to them early, and were we potentially setting ourselves up for a fall by them thinking that we were already, you know, we had buckets of grant funding that meant they could ask the moon for their properties. But actually, you know, I see there's a question later about what would we have done differently. I think talking to those owners earlier would have been one of the things that I would have wanted to have done earlier, because we literally agonized and ran ourselves around in circles about how we were going to talk to these people. What would happen if we said this? What would happen? And actually, they are just people. I mean, they are motivated by, you know, the difference is that we're more emotionally motivated than they are, probably. But the conversation was the important thing, and just being straightforward and honest about what we wanted and what we were able to offer made all the difference.
Great, thanks. Julie's asking about community asset transfer and community buy processes, which is easier. Well, hopefully we've answered that already. With was kind of touched on already. How easy was it to get the asset transfer from the council? I think, Matt, that's you again. You were involved in that from the very start.
I negotiated that one, yeah. Actually, it was easy, but I know that very much varies from council to council. Dumfries and Galloway really has an active policy of asset transfer. They've got they restructured the council and made one of the 4 departments a community department, which was all very much aimed at supporting things like community asset transfers and community empowerment. So you could argue in Dumfries and Galloway that they're sort of slightly rolling back on that a little bit. They've got a little bit more questioning now about some of the asset transfers, and council members are perhaps looking for a little bit more money back on some of the things that they're giving away to the community. But generally speaking, that has been really straightforward, and has been really game changing within our community. The number of buildings in particular that are now in community ownership. It does create strategic issues within the council, you know, because if you've got all these properties that are then suddenly looking for investment for redevelopment, how does then the council have a strategic role overview of which of those projects to put forward for things like Regeneration Capital Grant Fund at Scottish Government level? That does create a blockage there and an issue, and I think Dumfries and Galloway is sort of struggling to resolve that strategically at the moment.
Thanks, Matt. What are the various backgrounds of the Society's governing committee, and do we all live in the town? Evie?
Yeah, so, well, I'm a lifelong Doonhamer. I've lived here my entire life, and I think everybody else pretty much is Doonhamers. We've co-opted people from outside the area that have ties here for additional expertise. But I mean, our very first chairman was the last resident of the High Street. I live at the bottom of the High Street, and you know, everybody's in the DG1, DG2 postcodes, which is what the organisation was set up to cover. So I think for us, it's really important that the people who represent the organisation are representative of the people we serve. So and Alison, you're a Doonhamer.
Yes, I spent my teenage years living in Dumfries and thinking about the High Street area where there were at that point various places you could go to do some underage drinking, and you could hang out in with your mates. It was quite a busy place. I've been up northwest living in Applecross for 36 years and came back to Dumfries 2 years ago and attended my first Midsteeple Quarter board meeting the same week as I moved back down. The fact that there was community-led things going on, kind of groundbreaking stuff, was one of the reasons I chose to come back to Dumfries. I wouldn't have liked to have moved to a place where there wasn't that sort of thing happening. I came back also to look after my dad, but I would not have come back so willingly if I hadn't known all the exciting things that were going on here.
I think the other important thing is that, you know, it's a mix of people as well. You know, we've got people from the retail sector that, you know, are affected by the decline of the traditional high street. We've got young people that have lived in their town all their life and either, you know, chose to stay there or want to make sure more people do choose to stay there. So I think, and, you know, like Alison, there's people that have gone away and come back. So the kind of different trains of thoughts and experiences that people have had are kind of helping us shape whatever comes next for the many, not the few. Have I froze or has Scott froze?
I think Scott's frozen.
Well,
Scott.
Disappeared.
will I do the next question? I'll take over. Matt, could you maybe do this next question? It's about how the staff and project team's funded. Staff and project team funded. Well, the funding generally for the Midsteeple Quarter has been a sort of almost like a sort of hit and run affair in terms of like I was saying, this isn't, you know, we're not following an established route here. So there isn't a plotted out path of funding laid down by funders. So we've had to sort of like be opportunistic basically. But where we are at the moment in terms of the funding for the project team is a mix of money from the Inspiring Scotland, Inspiring Communities Fund from Scottish Government that is administered by Development Trust Association, I believe, and bits of project grants that also include some money for project management. So it's very much a sort of hand-to-mouth existence on that front. And I think, you know, if there's any lessons again out of this experience for us, is that early core investment, core staffing investment in community projects to get off the ground, it is absolutely critical. We were very lucky with that Town Centre Living Fund. Without that, literally Midsteeple Quarter would not have happened. So. Thanks, Matt. I guess we're just about finishing up on time. There's one question maybe that we could just fit in, and it's one that's, if we had to do it all again, what would we do differently? Briefly, Matt, what would you say to that you haven't already touched on? Where are we? I think yeah, moving earlier with the house with the owners. Sorry, I'm going to come back to that one. That's the one that is really sticking out. Alison, for you, if we had to do it all again, what would you do differently?
I don't know. There is all that much we would have done differently. It would have been good to know, you know, when we were going to auction and failing to buy properties, it would have been good to have been able to know that actually things were going to change, because at that point that felt like quite a barrier when we went to auction, two auctions fairly quickly, and were substantially outbid, and we were kind of thinking at that point, how on earth are we going to get hold of other properties? We had the oven, but we weren't managing to get hold of anything else, and it looked like the owners were really going to be quite unwilling to sell, except at prices that we were never going to manage to put the funding together. So yeah, I think it would have been great to know that, and but otherwise it wouldn't have changed, I don't think. Scott, I've jumped in your chair, so I'll just ask you finally, and then I think we'll close. If we had to do this all again, what would you do differently, briefly, just to close us?
It's difficult to answer that because of the pioneering nature of it. It's very much been a let's push doors and see which one's open. It's been difficult to have a clear strategy about it. So the kind of vision has been important, to keep that vision ahead of us, to keep aiming for it and see where that journey takes us. From my point of view, I don't think there would be anything I could say really that we would do differently. Yeah.
No, I have to agree. Everything happens for a reason. Well, we hand back over to you guys. Is there any way that we can reply back to these questions that we've not got to another time, or how do we best do that?
Absolutely. I have taken note of all the questions, and I will share them with yourselves, and then we can answer them and then share them with a follow-up email that I'll plan to send out alongside the recording. So yes, we'll make sure that we get back to all the questions. It's really inspiring to hear from you guys about this project, but also to see how engaged other people are with this conversation and with this subject. And rest assured, everyone, this will not be the last time we're holding space for exploring these issues from Community Land Scotland's perspective. So thanks again for everyone for joining us. And we have the second part of this event is tomorrow at 2 o'clock, where we'll explore these issues in more detail with a panel of speakers. More information on that is in the Eventbrite that you used to sign up for this event. So I don't want to keep anyone longer on the call. Thanks again to everyone for joining us. And yeah, keep following the work of Midsteeple Quarter, who are without a doubt a shining example of community ownership in towns. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.